Hey adventurers, so today's going to be another book review. This is going to be for The Snow Child by Eowyn Ivey. This is historical fiction, magical realism, fantasy, fairy tale. There's kind of, I don't know exactly how to classify this, and I feel like a lot of people would classify it very differently. The Snow Child by Eowyn Ivey is a magical tale about a couple that moves to a homestead in Alaska in the 1920s in an attempt to put their old life behind them and start fresh. A setup that is very familiar and well known to Alaskans. That's a very normal story for Alaskans. In fact, there's a ton of families who started that way, where they left everything in the States and moved up here because they wanted to be away from people, they wanted a fresh start, whatever it might be. And that's what this story is. And so that basic setup is very familiar to me, very understandable to me. Like I got that. I understand why that story is being told. So a setup that is very familiar and well known to Alaskans, as it is absolutely something that happened a ton and to some degree still does even today. However, this story doesn't just tell a tale of their attempted survival, but instead moves into a fairy tale-like story of longing, grief, loss, love, and so much more. Before I get into this review, though, I'd just quickly like to say welcome to an Erudite adventure. I'm T. If you're liking what you're seeing from us, please like, comment, and subscribe. Alright, so this is a very interesting story for me because I don't know what to think of it. This happens occasionally. I've had a couple stories where I get to the end of them and I have no idea what to think about the story when I get to the end of it. I chose not to rate it on Goodreads because I don't feel like I can put a star number value on my opinion at this time. It's hard for me to say. It's not. I know it wasn't a 5-star. I know it wasn't a 1-star. It's just where in that middle area does it actually belong. There's a lot of different aspects to my perception of this book. Of course, the obvious one being that it is set in Alaska, a setting that I am intimately familiar with due to me being an Alaskan. And so that in and of itself gives me something to think about, something to compare it to, something to a way to understand and relate to the book in a way that maybe a lot of other readers won't have. And because of that, I have a bit of natural draw to the story itself. However, at the same time, I don't read much that could be considered magical realism, which to me is just a pretentious way of saying low fantasy. I don't know. I probably shouldn't include that, but I do. That's just a thought that I inserted as I was writing out this review, and probably it shouldn't be in there, but it is, so you hear it. But nor am I really the target audience of this novel. That's the biggest one, I think. All of which absolutely influence my experience of this book. So there's some things that influence my experience positively. There's some things that influence my experience negatively. And trying to reconcile all those things into an opinion that I can rate, that's kind of hard for me to do as a reader. To start with, the one note that I wrote down while listening to this book was that for a historical novel set in the 1920s, this book feels weirdly modern. And I don't exactly know what I mean by that even. I think it's mostly in the execution and the style of the storytelling, of the writing. The decisions of the characters also occasionally fall into that more modern feeling, which I don't love. I would like a book set in a historical time period to be accurate historically as best you can. Obviously, you get a lot of license and leeway to do things differently when you're telling a story anyways, but also when you're telling a fantasy story. So like I can forgive some of that, but also how much does it actually affect my opinion of the book, of the novel? I mentioned this in the wrap up for the month that I read The Snow Child in, but with books set in Alaska or in a similar setting, I look for the accuracy of the setting as a part of the story and experience, because to me that is something I can observe and judge, and it's kind of like an objective aspect that I can base a little bit of my opinion upon when I'm reading the book. And while in terms of information, this book is very accurate to the location, somehow those details don't feed into the atmosphere of the book in a way that feels accurate to me as an Alaskan. And it's something that I don't know how to describe. Like, the information is there. They talk about the mosquitoes, they talk about the cold, they talk about the snow, in the way that they affect people. But there's something about it that just does not ring true in my mind while I'm reading the book, even though the information is accurate. And so it's really weird combination, and I don't know how to feel about that even. I don't I don't entirely know how that can be the case either, but I've also read other books that do a much better job about that. Even books that aren't written by Alaskans or authors who lived in Alaska, even books that aren't set in Alaska. Sometimes I can read them and be like, this feels more Alaskan. And that's weird to me. I don't understand that. As far as the story itself, the magical aspects with Faina, the snow child, and what that means, how that affects the story, etc., those things were fantastic. Like, genuinely, that was some good storytelling. There's a bit of tragedy built into the story, which I do like tragedies. The experiences of our characters in this wild last frontier is something that will always resonate with me. That's like, I like that. I like seeing stories about people surviving in Alaska. That is fun to me. The relationships, the characters, the bonds built between families because of the need to survive. Those things are all very well done, in my opinion. I thought that was some of the strongest work in the books. So there's a lot in this book, but I'm not sure how to reconcile the story with the execution, especially since I know that I am reminded of several other stories. Tisha by Robert Specht, which is a real historical novel about a teacher in Alaska. Mrs. Mike by Benedict and Nancy Friedman, which is a couple living and surviving in Canada, and I believe it's in the Yukon Territories, so it's a very similar climate to Alaska. And also The Bear and the Nightingale, which is about a girl who can interact with spirits in Russia. I'm reminded of all those books and several others, but I'm not sure how this one ranks up even against those three. It's interesting to me that I'm reminded of those three stories, two of which kind of have some similar aspects, whereas The Bear and the Nightingale is probably the most different of the three, but also like I'm reminded of that one too, especially with the magical aspects that are woven into this book. So it's just interesting. The way that my mind latched on and grabbed onto those other stories, even though I wasn't specifically looking for that or thinking about that while I was reading, those are the books that came to my mind. I'd like to hear some other people's thoughts on The Snow Child that maybe aren't quite as close to it as I am in terms of knowing Alaska as well as they do and this type of story as well as I do. Overall, I do think that I'm glad that I read it. It's just there's a lot of nuance there for me, and so I feel like a 3-star, which is kind of the generic middle of the road, that's what it's supposed to mean. I feel like that is a decent place for me to put the story, rate the book, because it's just middle of the road and I don't know where I truly feel about it. But that's not accurate. I think that this one I couldn't give a subjective opinion of. I think that this one I would have to go through and objectively analyze it like I occasionally do based on characters, plots, themes, world building, and uniqueness factor, I believe, are my 5 points that I give, and then obviously personal enjoyment is that final star. And it's not obvious. If you haven't watched my video, I'd recommend going and watching that video, which I'll have linked up here, of how I have a ranking system for a more objective ranking. And because of that, I don't know what I would do with this book in terms of a subjective ranking. It's interesting to me. It's one that for now it's going to have to sit as unranked, unrated, because I don't know. I don't know what to think of it. But anyways, that is my review for The Snow Child by Eowyn Ivey. Thank you guys for watching an Erudite Adventure. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and we will see you guys again soon. Stay warm.